They saw a black woman they could control. She saw a broken system she was about to dismantle, starting with them. Wait up. Before we get into this jaw-dropping story, I want to hear from you. If you support Natasha Parker's fight against injustice, comment, stand up, and subscribe right now. If you're on the fence, just hit that like button. And stay tuned until the very end. There's a plot twist you won't see coming. As Natasha Parker gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles whitened with tension. Today was supposed to be monumental, a day of triumph. She was the first black woman to be appointed chief of police in this God-forsaken, narrow-minded town. But instead of pride, she felt the suffocating weight of anger pressing down on her chest. Anger at the system, anger at the prejudices she knew were waiting to greet her, and anger at herself for daring to believe that her hard work would be enough. The city's skyline loomed ahead, its cold concrete towers a stark reminder of everything she was up against. She could almost hear the whispers. She doesn't belong here. Affirmative action hire. They're just checking a box. Her jaw tightened, fury bubbling up inside her. Did they have any idea the blood, sweat, and tears it took to get here? To claw her way up in a system rigged to see her fail? Her phone buzzed with another congratulatory message. She wanted to smash it. What did they know about her struggle, about the nights she spent questioning her sanity, her worth, about the moments she had to bite her tongue as her colleagues dismissed her as too emotional or not a good fit? They didn't see the battles she fought just to keep her dignity intact. Natasha's eyes burned with rage. This wasn't just another job. This was war, and today was just the first battle. She was here to shatter every expectation, to rip apart every stereotype they had about her. She would burn down their biases and rise from the ashes, not just as chief, but as a force they would never forget. Natasha Parker's heart pounded as the red and blue lights flashed behind her, piercing through her rearview mirror like mocking beacons. Of course, they pulled her over. Of course, on her first day as the chief of police, she was getting stopped. It was almost poetic in its absurdity. She took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel so hard she could feel the cheap plastic creaking beneath her fingers. The anger was rising, scorching her chest. She could already predict how this would play out, and it made her blood boil. Two white officers swaggered towards her car with the arrogance of men who believed they owned the road, the law, and everyone under its jurisdiction. Their faces were hardened, eyes narrowed, carrying that air of suspicion reserved for people who looked like her. Natasha could feel the familiar sting of humiliation, a feeling she had spent her entire life fighting. But today, it was sharper, more painful. Today, it wasn't just about her, it was about everything she stood for, everything she had overcome. The younger officer rapped on her window with unnecessary force, his lips curled into a faint sneer. "License and registration," he barked, his tone dripping with condescension. Natasha met his gaze, her eyes blazing with defiance, but she kept her mouth shut. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. She handed over her documents in silence, watching as they exchanged smug glances, silently validating each other's prejudices. The senior officer leaned in, his voice low and taunting. "You know, this isn't exactly the safest neighborhood for someone like you." The words hit her like a slap to the face. Someone like you. She knew exactly what he meant. She had heard it her whole life, in classrooms, at job interviews, even at the grocery store. But coming from a man who was supposed to serve and protect, it was an insult she wouldn't tolerate. Not today, not ever again. Her fingers dug into her thighs as she fought the urge to lash out, to shout, to demand the respect she had more than earned. But she knew how the game was played. She knew they were waiting for her to make a scene, to justify their bias. So she swallowed her fury, letting it simmer beneath the surface, sharpening her resolve. This wasn't just about them, this was about the system they represented, a system she was about to turn on its head. They dragged out the stop, flipping through her paperwork with exaggerated scrutiny, searching for any excuse to escalate the situation. Natasha watched them, her fury growing with each passing second. They were so comfortable, so confident in their authority. They had no idea they were standing on the brink of their own reckoning. Then came the question she had been waiting for, the one that would shatter their smug superiority. "What's your purpose in this area?" the young officer asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Natasha looked up, her eyes locking onto his, and in that moment she decided she was done playing their game. Her voice was steady, but every word was laced with barely contained rage. "I'm on my way to work," she replied, her gaze never wavering. The officer's eyes narrowed. "And what kind of work would that be?" The audacity of his question almost made her laugh. Almost. She could feel the words rising in her throat, ready to explode, but she held back, savoring the moment. "You'll find out soon enough," she said, her voice dripping with defiance. She watched the confusion flicker across his face, the faintest hint of uncertainty. They were beginning to feel the shift, but they didn't understand it yet. Natasha leaned back, folding her arms, her anger still burning, but now it was accompanied by something else. Anticipation. They had no idea who they were dealing with, but they were about to learn. And when they did, their world would never be the same. "Can you feel the tension?" Natasha is standing at the edge of a moment that will change everything. What do you think she should do next? Call them out or let them dig their own graves? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit subscribe to see how this explosive encounter unfolds. Natasha Parker's patience was slipping, crumbling under the weight of her rage. She had played their game long enough, biting her tongue, swallowing her pride, letting them flex their power over her as if she were just another black woman they could intimidate. But she was done. The simmering fury in her chest was now a roaring flame, threatening to consume her. She could feel it coursing through her veins, tightening her throat, making her fists tremble. She wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not today, not ever again. The senior officer stepped closer, his smugness infuriatingly palpable. "We could detain you for further questioning," he threatened, his voice dripping with false authority. He spoke the words slowly, letting each syllable hang in the air like a noose, tightening around her dignity. It was a power play, a calculated move to remind her of her place, except he had no idea who he was talking to. Natasha's jaw clenched so hard she thought her teeth would crack. She was teetering on the edge, every nerve in her body screaming for her to lash out, to put him in his place. But she forced herself to stay calm, to channel her fury into focus. They wanted her to lose control. They wanted a reason to write her off as angry, as aggressive, as everything they already believed about women who looked like her. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air steady her, her eyes locked onto his, burning with defiance. She saw the flicker of discomfort in his gaze, the momentary crack in his confidence. Good. Let him feel the weight of his own arrogance. Let him realize that his power was an illusion, built on centuries of privilege and prejudice. She wasn't just another citizen. She was his boss, and she was about to make that very clear. "That's enough," she said, her voice slicing through the tension like a blade. It was steady, cold, and laced with authority. The senior officer's expression faltered, his confidence wavering as he took a step back. Natasha stepped out of the car, standing tall, her posture radiating power. "I'm your new boss," she declared, her words sharp and unforgiving. "Chief Natasha Parker, and I want to know why you stopped me." The color drained from his face. His jaw slackened, eyes widening in shock. The younger officer looked like he'd seen a ghost, their arrogance shattered in an instant, replaced by raw fear. Natasha's rage flared, hotter than ever. She could see them scrambling to justify their actions, searching for excuses that didn't exist. But she wasn't about to let them off the hook. "I want to know why you felt so comfortable profiling me," she demanded, her voice low and menacing. "I want to know why you thought it was acceptable to abuse your authority, and I want to know how many other people you've harassed just because they didn't fit your idea of who belongs here." The senior officer stammered, his words tumbling over each other in a pathetic attempt at an apology. I didn't realize, we didn't mean, it was a misunderstanding." His voice was trembling now, his bravado crumbling. Natasha cut him off with a glare that could freeze fire. "Number. The problem is that you didn't even think. You saw my skin color and made your decision. You assumed your power gave you the right to humiliate me. But let me make this very clear. You have no power over me. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever. She let the words hang, heavy and unforgiving. She watched them squirm, watched their faces flush with shame. It was satisfying, yes, but it wasn't enough. This wasn't just about her. It was about every black person they had ever disrespected, every citizen they had ever dehumanized. This was about tearing down the system that gave them permission to act this way. Natasha stepped back, her gaze unwavering. "I expect a full report on every stop you make this week," she ordered, her tone cold and commanding. "And believe me, I will be watching you, closely." She turned on her heel, leaving them standing there, shattered and speechless. As she drove away, her fury still boiling, she knew this was just the beginning. She was here to change everything they thought they knew about power, and she wasn't going to stop until every last wall of prejudice came crashing down. Natasha Parker stood there, the cold wind biting at her face, but the fire within her was blazing. She had watched them squirm, stutter, and stumble over their pathetic excuses, their arrogance crumbling before her. But it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. This was about more than their ignorant words or their racist assumptions. This was about a system that had empowered them to treat her like nothing, even though she was everything they feared. A black woman who refused to bow. She looked the senior officer dead in the eyes, her gaze unrelenting. "You thought you could intimidate me," she said, her voice sharp and piercing. "You thought your badge gave you the right to question my existence, to diminish my humanity. But the truth is, you're scared. You're scared because people like me are stepping into power, and you can't stand it." Her words cut through the cold air, hanging heavy with the weight of truth. She could see the shame washing over his face, his shoulders slumping as reality crashed down on him. Natasha's heart pounded, each beat fueled by years of anger and defiance. She remembered every insult, every doubt, every time someone tried to make her feel small, but she wasn't small, she was monumental, and she was done playing by their rules. "You stood here, drunk on your authority, convinced that you were untouchable," she continued, her voice rising. "But you're not. Not anymore. You answer to me now." The younger officer looked like he wanted to disappear, his eyes glued to the ground. She had half a mind to tear into him too, but she could see the fear in his face, the realization that everything he believed about power was a lie. She almost pitied him. Almost. But her anger was too great, her purpose too clear. Natasha took a step closer, her presence overwhelming. "You think you can hide behind that badge?" she challenged, her voice hard as steel. "That uniform doesn't make you righteous. It doesn't make you just. It makes you responsible. And today, you're going to be held accountable." She watched them with unblinking intensity, letting them feel the full force of her authority. She wasn't going to let them off easy. This was her moment to rewrite the narrative, to show them that their power was nothing compared to her resolve. She had earned her place, fought for it tooth and nail, and she wasn't about to let them tarnish it with their ignorance. Natasha Parker stood tall, her anger transforming into power, her defiance solidifying her purpose. They would remember this day, they would remember her name, and they would never forget the day they realized that power didn't belong to them. It belonged to her. Natasha Parker's blood boiled as she stood before them, her presence towering, her fury uncontainable. She watched the officers cower, their arrogance shattered. They were scrambling for excuses, desperately trying to justify their blatant abuse of power. But she wouldn't allow it. Not today. Not ever. "You thought you could disrespect me because of the color of my skin," Natasha spat, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You thought you could diminish me, make me feel small because that's how you've always kept people like me in line. But look at you now. Pathetic, powerless, exposed." Her words were relentless, each one a hammer shattering their illusion of authority. The younger officer's face burned with shame, his eyes fixed on the ground. The senior officer opened his mouth to speak, but Natasha's glare silenced him. She was done listening to their excuses, their justifications, their lies. "You didn't see me as your superior. You didn't even see me as a human being," she continued, her voice unwavering. "You saw a threat, an inconvenience, something to control. But your control is over. She stepped closer, her eyes blazing. "You are everything that's wrong with this system," Natasha declared, her voice fierce and unyielding. "You use your badge as a weapon, your authority as a shield, and your prejudice as an excuse. But not under my watch. Not anymore." She let her words hang heavy in the air, watching them crumble under the weight of her truth. This was her reckoning, and she would make damn sure they never forgot it. Natasha Parker's story isn't just about facing discrimination. It's about redefining leadership and justice. She stood tall, not just to defend herself, but to challenge a system built on prejudice and abuse of power. Her refusal to back down wasn't just defiance. It was a declaration that real change begins with leaders who confront injustice head on. Natasha didn't just demand respect. She commanded it, using her authority to expose corruption and demand accountability. She didn't just break stereotypes, she shattered the chains of bias, proving that true power lies in the courage to stand alone against a broken system. In 2025, Marsha Wilson's story isn't just about a traffic stop. It's about breaking chains that have bound communities for generations. As the first Black woman to lead her precinct, Marsha didn't just confront prejudice. She stood against an entire system designed to undermine her authority. Her defiance isn't just personal, it's a declaration for all who've been silenced, overlooked, and judged by the color of their skin. Through Marsha, we see that true leadership isn't about power. It's about courage, integrity, and the will to change what's broken. Her battle is a reminder that change starts with the courage to confront injustice head on. Marsha's fight has just begun, and she needs us by her side.